Greetings from Paranormal M, the channel where we delve deep into enigmatic tales. Whether you're about to go to sleep, procrastinating perhaps, or just looking for some scary stories, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and also, if you could, leave a comment and help us with this algorithm. We hope you're ready for an adventure that'll leave you in awe. I don't fully believe in ghosts, but if anything is going to convince me, it's what happened to me earlier this year. Me and my family had plans to fly to Arizona, stay with my brother who we hadn't seen in a while. I stayed in a room downstairs while they stayed in the one upstairs. After a few days, they started complaining of weird noises in the room, but ended up catching a flight home earlier while I stayed. I ended up taking their room because it was bigger, and my first night in there was my last. It was nighttime. I was ready for bed. I had just laid down and I had my eyes closed. After about a minute of laying there, not even close to sleeping, I saw a large flash of light, like someone shined a flashlight on my eyelids, and the loudest bang I'd ever heard. It was so loud my ears started ringing. Scared shitless, I got up and ran downstairs to the living room, turned on all the lights including the TV, trying to figure out what had just happened. Not 3 minutes later, the house alarm starts blaring that the door to the garage open, door to the garage open. It's my best robot. That woke up my brother, who got up and turned off the alarm. We didn't find anything at all. Let's just say I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. The next day we met up with some friends for lunch, and I tell them the story of what happened. One of them asked me if I knew the story about the house before I bought it, or before he bought it. I said no, so they said there was a family living there before your brother bought it. The kid and the father had a big argument that led to the kid shooting his dad while he was asleep in bed. Shortly afterward, the kid ran to the garage and shot himself and committed suicide. That completely lined up with what I experienced the night before. If ghosts are real, that entire experience has me convinced. Friend had a doppelganger experience on Halloween. Thin veil? ? A friend called me today, November 1st, and he wanted to let me know what happened to him yesterday on Halloween. Thought it was a little spooky. My friend is in Colorado for a work assignment. He's been sick with a cold while being there. For context, we both live in Texas, and I currently live in Texas. On his way into a store yesterday to pick up some cold medicine, he claims to have seen me, or someone who looks just like me, walking by him, roughly 5 feet away. He pauses, shouts my name, and the doppelganger continues to walk on without acknowledging my friend. My friend then shouts an apology again with no acknowledgement. Sounds like a case of mistaken identity. A coincidence, maybe. My friend calls his wife later on just to tell her about what happened. She insists that he called to me too. Basically, make sure that I'm still alive. Her reasoning was that the veil is thin on Halloween. She basically told him that he has to call to make sure that I'm still alive. Well, I am still alive. My friend thinks that he must have just been mistaken or sick enough to hallucinate seeing me in Colorado. I shook him and his wife up, though. After hearing the story, I can't help but wonder about the possibility for something more exciting than mistaken identity. Especially if the doppelganger didn't even respond. Would a ghost or a hallucination be able to respond? I know this sounds weird, but I think I have a mimic. This morning I was getting my toddler dressed, and we heard someone talking out in the living room. My older son was in the kitchen and didn't hear it. My partner's at work, so we definitely shouldn't be hearing him talking. It wasn't my older son talking to himself because it sounded like a man's voice. My toddler got excited because he thought it might be his dad coming home from work. 2 weeks ago, I was laying in bed. My 2-year-old climbed into bed with me at 5:30. I told him to go in his bed so I could have a minute to wake up. His bed is next to mine. I was laying on my back when I saw him leave the room instead of going to his bed. I told him, "Don't leave the room." He went to his bed. A couple of minutes later, I saw him leave the room. He was wearing his robe and the door opened. I sat up and said, "Hey, get back here." When I looked over to his bed, he was still in his bed. I was so freaked out. I have a camera in my living room, but I wasn't subscribed to storage. It did pick up movement at both of the times that I saw my son leave the room. The day before this, there was movement in my older son's room. I was home alone and the cat was on my lap. She even reacted to it. My older son is 10 and says sometimes he's woken up at night to his toys in his room bin being jostled around. My boyfriend is seeing a black cat figure. It's none of my current alive cats. A month ago, my boyfriend was in our bed. He was awake when he saw a black cat walking across the hall. The cat was in front of the open door of the bedroom. None of my cats are black. He thought maybe a neighbor's cat got into the apartment, so he went looking for the black cat, but couldn't find it. That day, I decided later to put my sick cat to sleep. It was really painful, and it was really hard to make that choice. His name was Emilio. Emilio! That morning, Emilio was in the studio's closet, and my other 2 cats were in the living room. When my boyfriend saw the black cat, he interpreted it as an omen, like a confirmation that Emilio was going to die that day. He told me this days later. Yesterday, he told me he saw the black cat again. He was in bed again reading when he saw a black tail going underneath the bed. It wasn't a shadow. It was dense and completely black. He was trying to find the logic in that, so maybe it was Haku, my gray cat. He looked under the bed and no one was there. Haku was sleeping in the other bedroom. I asked him if maybe it was Emilio, my cat who passed away, but he said no, it didn't look like Emilio. Besides, the first time he saw it was when Emilio was still alive. So far, my 2 cats don't seem nervous or on alert when the apparitions had occurred. Had sleep paralysis and saw my partner in the end of the bed while dreaming, but it wasn't my partner. So a few days ago, I, a 24-year-old female, was supposed to go somewhere really early in the morning with my partner, but I decided to skip it and keep sleeping. I covered my face with a sheet because daylight didn't let me sleep well. So at some point while I was sleeping, I felt my partner come back and sit at the end of the bed while saying a word. Rather, without saying a word. Even though I had a sheet covering my face, it didn't cover it completely, so I was able to see the brief space, and I saw my partner's legs and my foot touching one of them. Her skin was cold. I felt happy for a second that she came back, but then I realized there was no way she could come back from her class so soon, and I realized that wasn't my partner. I tried to move and uncovered my face from the sheet, but I had sleep paralysis and couldn't move at all. I don't know how to explain it, but because I forgot part of that dream, we'll call it. But I knew that that person wasn't my partner, even though it looked like her. I tried to move, but I couldn't, and then I felt really horny. I knew that person was making me feel that way, and I couldn't do anything to stop it, wake up, or do pretty much anything. I don't remember the rest. I don't remember if it touched me or did something else. I just woke up to a huge urge to masturbate. Sorry, guys. That dream was very vivid and scared me a lot. When my girlfriend, a 25-year-old female, arrived, I told her about the dream, and she recommended me not to think about it because I was really scared. Somebody or something was inside my attic. This just happened, and I'm pretty shaken up by it all. But this evening, while putting away some clothes in my closet, I noticed the entry point to my attic had been disturbed and set ajar. I live in a condo with my wife and child. Our master bedroom has a walk-in closet with an access point or a lid or whatever you call it to our attic. I don't believe the attic connects with any of the other condos, but we do share walls with neighbors on both sides. As I was folding and putting away laundry this evening, my wife walked in from the connecting bathroom. Our master bedrooms and bathroom connect directly across the walk-in closet, so they face entryways, and went to ask me something when she gasped and said, "Look up." My blood turned cold immediately. There it was. The entry point drywall lid was lifted out of its place and set ajar. She had been giving our child a bath at that same time, basically right there, and I froze for a moment, not knowing what exactly to do or how to handle the situation. Got a hold of myself, dialed 911 while my wife and child went downstairs in a hurry. She got both of them ready while I stayed on guard, watching the entry to the attic crawl space. Police showed up after what felt like an eternity and checked up there, but couldn't find anything, no signs of forced entry, just an obviously lifted up and placed ajar crawl space cover. Now I'm here alone wondering if we overreacted or what the fuck exactly happened. Somebody or something moved that lid, door, cover, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't bumped or hit by myself or my wife, and my child is not able to get anywhere near that access point. The creepiest part / thing that bothers me the most is, I don't know if it was moved from inside the attic or from my closet below. Police said the drywall that connects up there wasn't broken or cut up. Again, I live in a condo with neighbors on both sides. There was no signs of a disturbed fiberglass near the entry or around my closet, so no one was obviously crawling around or messing shit up at least. I'm seriously thinking about someone placing a lock on the entry point, but I'm not good with that kind of handiwork, and wouldn't even know how to begin cutting or making a sturdier lid, or access, to even try to put a lock on one. It's a shame. I know this might not be considered paranormal to most, but I had a dream about a similar situation a couple weeks or a month or so ago. In my dream, a woman called me seemingly on a random day and said bluntly, "Is there someone inside your house?" I panicked and rushed everyone in my house out the door. I had my wife out in front of my kid, but I also had other family members over that day. So not exactly the same situation, and I can't remember if we found anyone or anything. But it's been a strange night to say the least. Thanks for reading, and any advice to my situation would be greatly appreciated. I would throw a lock on that thing just to make yourself feel better. My Doppelganger. When I was younger in elementary school, I used to stay home a lot. I was a troubled kid who used to get sick or fake sick a lot, just so I didn't have to go to school. I also used to live with my grandmother because my mom and dad were going through a divorce. Her house was kind of off, and things used to happen all the time. I used to see things and hear children's giggles right behind me. One day for once, I actually went to school, and when I came home I heard this story. My grandmother walked up to my mom, who was sitting in the living room, and asked, "Why didn't Seacatsnek go to school?" And my mom, confused, told her, she did. My grandmother told her that she saw me in my room, with my back turned to the door, and I was brushing my hair. She said I was wearing the green Hollister shirt my stepsister gave me. They went back to check, and no one was there. She swore she saw me as clear as day. I've heard about doppelgangers before, but never thought about mine being so close. Seacatsnek is a weird name. But that was her name earlier in the story, in case that didn't make sense to you. Things disappear and reappear. Weird shit tends to happen to me. I went to North Carolina a few months ago to visit an online friend. We're cosplayers, and we planned to attend Comic-Con while I was visiting. So on the second day of con, my friend was dressed in a Demon Slayer cosplay. The cosplay came with a pair of earrings. During the drive, he complained that the earrings were starting to hurt and took them off in the middle of the console. Watched him do it. Con goes on, and he's doing a Demon Slayer photo shoot. Halfway through the shoot, he realizes he forgot his earrings in the car. So, he goes to grab them in the car. They're not in the middle console. He came back and grabbed me. We searched the car top to bottom. Keep in mind, we store everything we needed in the back seat. We never once opened the trunk. We didn't put anything back there. Well, on the off chance that they may have been there, we just opened it, and they were sitting neatly right next to each other, as if someone had primly sat them there. Primly. We were both a little freaked out. Now, the reason I mentioned this was because of what happened today. I lost my blue pair of Skull Candy headphones and searched high and low for them. I gave up and just decided to buy another pair of cheaper headphones. I figured if I found my blue headphones, then at least I could have an extra pair. Well, those disappeared too. Then today, when I was looking for those, I happened to glance over a place I already looked, remember looking, and saw my blue headphones. In a place I couldn't have easily found them, and wouldn't have found them. I brushed it off, sat on my chest. I brushed it off and sat down on my chest. This is important, in parentheses, where I had already looked for my cheaper pair of headphones. Note, I had already looked there multiple times for the cheaper pair. When I came home, my boyfriend told me that he found my cheaper pair. They were sitting on the goddamn chest where I had sat down and also looked around thoroughly. He promised me he didn't even move them. He didn't move them because he wanted me to see exactly where he found them. He promised me with the most serious look that he definitely wasn't messing with me. He's extremely sincere and wouldn't lie, so what the hell? Even if he was, stuff like this happens all the time, and it's happened for years before we dated. Things disappearing and reappearing. I don't feel like there's a ghost in here. I've never felt, heard, or saw anything. Well, there is this one weird thing. I occasionally smell something like bad breath in my room, like some real dank breath, and it comes and goes. I watched my mom read while I was asleep. Of all of the things I've ever experienced, this is the most unexplainable. My first ever sleep paralysis dream was when I was a teenager. I lived in a very small house with my mom and brother. and we all shared a room. My brother and I shared a bed on one side of the room. It was a pretty small room, and my mother slept in a twin bed on the other. I fell asleep, and when I woke up, quote unquote, it was broad daylight. My brother was gone, and I was in the same position I'd fallen asleep in. I was sideways on my bed, facing my mother's bed, and propped up. It felt like someone had their arms around me from behind, but I couldn't see who they were. My mom was on her bed in different clothes than the one she'd fallen asleep in. She was on her stomach and reading a book. I tried to call out for her, but I couldn't move or speak. I was scared because I couldn't move, but I didn't feel that whatever was holding me was dangerous or threatening. Just that they were holding me up. Went on for at least 10 minutes. I screamed in my head and tried to get her to hear me. Nothing worked. I started praying. Then I woke up. When I woke up, I was expecting to be sideways like I was in my dream. But instead, I woke up in the same position I fell asleep in. My mom, however, was exactly where she was in my dream, down to the closed book and laying on her stomach. I still freaking out. I asked her what the hell she did waking me up, or why she didn't hear me calling for her. She looked at me confused and told me that I was asleep and she didn't even hear me sleep talking, let alone calling out to her. That was my first sleep paralysis dream, and the rest that followed were more normal. It happened at night. I would see dark, shadowy figures and I couldn't move. Most were normal except for one where I was carried from one room to the next by an unseen figure. I don't have them anymore, but I still have issues sleeping, like waking up 5 or 6 times in the middle of the night for no reason. I take meds now, and I mostly stay asleep except for every now and then when I wake up and go back to nightmares or just for no reason. But if I miss a night, I go right back to waking up 6 or 7 times. Since I got with my boyfriend, with history of paranormal history, I think I brought something home. Me, a 17-year-old female, recently started dating my boyfriend, 19, like 5 months ago. But we've been talking for about a year. We're so attached to each other and have such a healthy relationship. The scary part is the relationship is fine. It's what me and him have heard and seen which scares me even more, because he was there to be as spooked with me. Okay. He has told me that he has suspected his house has spirits. He has cats and he had a dog who passed it a long time ago. And when we stayed at his house, it was never more than just a door opening on its own. The spirit never felt negative. You can tell you weren't alone. My boyfriend isn't a solid believer until stuff happened to him. And when I tried to talk to him about any of the scary stuff, he'll just tear up a little bit and dismiss the topic. Tear up. He also had a dad with a bunch of money. So he owns and rents a couple of houses or whatever. My boyfriend's dad's renting a house in Gettysburg, very known for its haunting and deep history. And he had spoken about his family seeing things at this house and having seen shadows. Things lift on their own, which was unexplainable. His mom and brother started to believe in paranormal activity because of how intense that energy is. My boyfriend brought me to the house once. Well, we drove past it some time ago in the relationship, because he told me about how you'll never feel alone when we drove past. We live a little drive. We just drove past a big house, a shed, and a cornfield. They said they see things, but they didn't think that the entity is technically evil, but you can tell that they have seen shit. His dad is an electrical engineer, who even said that he gets the fucking spooks. Never feels alone. has maybe seen shit and heard things, and they're just so passionate about. I did feel creeps driving and getting close to that area. I trust my gut, and passing that house and area, we didn't feel good. I remember looking at my boyfriend, and he looked so pale. I don't know if he saw something or just as scared as me, especially knowing his history with this. But the scariest stuff happens at my house. I honestly don't know if I could have attracted or brought something towards me. There's been 3 solid events at my house, and they are all creepy as fuck. Like I said, my boyfriend avoids talking about it because he gets so creeped out because we have no explanation for these things. Event 1. Hearing knocking and going to check. We were watching Hulu and my boyfriend and I distinctly heard knocking. It was so scary because at this time I was telling him that I was seeing doors open at his house. But now at mine, this shit happened. And what scares us the most is how unhuman the knock sounded. He got up and was like, "You want me to check on that?" We were so creeped. I was, especially because after 3 lifeless knocks, we heard on my door, there was nobody else awake, and me showing him that fucked him up. The second and third event, my bong breaking, but from nothing. Me and my boyfriend smoke. We're just kids, but what I never would have expected is to see my bong literally break twice with 0 contact at all. First time we were just playing the video game and we saw the part of my bowl literally break, like it's a pure glass 200 bong. I bought and have never had issues with it up until now. And even then it happened so close together, the second time scared my boyfriend the most, because he saw firsthand what I'd been afraid of. My stuffed animal Lily is my baby, childhood toy, and my boyfriend loves her. So, when she's falling off my bed, he went to catch her, and when I look over, I heard and saw the glass snap in half, while my bear was in his hand, far from the bong. We were awestruck. The 2 bong incidents were like a week between each other. Because we go between my house and his, he looked so scared. I freaked out knowing nothing has made 0 contact with the bong for it to break, and we witnessed that and inspected the area multiple times for what could have done that. I'm just so creeped. I'm going to update. Feel free to ask questions. I'm very spiritual, and I do believe lived in God and spirits, my boyfriend too. House is calling to me. There's a house that was built in 1880, 4 minutes from my current apartment. I didn't know about it. I've been thinking about buying land and modifying shipping container. So at least I have a cheap home to live in without worrying about the landlord. So I Googled land for sale in my area, and this house popped up with about 1.5 acres of land. The problem is, the house has been clearly abandoned, which is why the house is listed for 30 grand. Now, I don't have enough for a deposit, nor do I know anything about fixing old homes, or really any home, but I decided for some reason to call the realtor selling the property, to which the realtor said that the house is an eyesore. She can't wait for the home to be knocked down. I don't know what it is about this property. I truly do believe it could be absolutely beautiful just given the chance, but I also know, but I also understand I would have to have a building inspector look at the property and see if the home is structurally stable. That much for sure I do know. But it's like, I cannot stop thinking about this house. I don't understand it. I've driven by the property at least 5 times. Since the photos online weren't that good and the realtor didn't have updated photos, each time the house has felt open and kind of lonely again. I cannot explain this. I tend to pick up on energies of people and places. I want to drive to that house today to check it out again. I just felt compelled for some reason. I felt the house's energy before I got there. I was about 2.5 miles from the home. It felt sad, desolate, lonely, exposed, and just like a whirlpool of different emotions. Has anyone else had this happen? What does that mean? I want to emphasize that even though I pick up on the energy of places, I do not actively look for things like this at best. I try to leave it alone, but I can't stop thinking about this house. I don't know anything about it other than it's been abandoned for 10 years. It needs work, and the home was built in 1880. I don't know, sir, but from time to time I felt like that house. My mom transferred shadow people onto me and my siblings. So this started all the way back with my grandpa. My mother tells me that my grandpa sleep-talked one day in a language that no one understood. When asked about what he dreamt about, he responded with, "I talked to 3 shadow people," but he couldn't remember what they were even talking about. Soon after, my mother saw 3 shadow people in her dreams as well. However, she never told me if they were talking to her or not. Further, she explained that with each child she had, one of the figures disappeared from her dreams. First my brother, then my sister, and lastly, me. 3 shadow people for 3 children. I saw shadowy figures when I was around 10, and that lasted for around 4 years. I can only really remember one instance where it truly scared me. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I felt a presence in my room looming right above me. When I opened my eyes, I could see a tall and lanky, misty figure in the corner of my eye standing over me. Before, they would kind of only show up in the corner of my eye at random times in the day or night. It never came that close to me before. I could never draw that sort of connection, as mine seemed to show up randomly. Then when I talked about it to my mom the next morning, she told me not to be scared of it. She told me that my siblings see the same figures. My brother was really freaked out by his, but my sister said that they serve as some kind of protector. She explained that hers always showed up when something bad is about to happen. And the bigger the figure, the more intense the bad thing. I haven't seen my figure since that night, and my mother's never seen any of the 3 after she gave birth to us. I have no idea about my brother or sister. To this day, I don't know where mine went or why I can't see it anymore. Me and my friend encountered something, and I need an explanation. A few years ago, me, Shane, and my friend Aaron are walking to his house from football training. This is Ireland, so GAA. I was kind of getting towards sundown, but anyway, his house is about 3 miles outside the village where we're from. About a mile down the road towards his house is another house called the Laragh House. Laragh. It's an old place, and you always hear stories of dogs not walking past and so on and so forth. Locals in the pub telling weird stories about the place. Maybe that it would light up, maybe they'd hear screams coming from it, but you always hear those stories, especially in Ireland. It was Sunday during the summer, and like I said, getting towards sundown. We go past the house and around the corner where there's another straight for maybe 50 meters. We're on the left, and on the right is what looked like a nice young girl, maybe our age, 18. She looks kind of Spanish, dark hair, and very pretty. We notice that she's wearing a dress that kind of looks really old. Lace and just something girls ain't wearing around here. Also, it's strange, but it's like a black and white filter on just her. Erin, being the more outgoing of us, says hi. She never answers, just stays walking ahead toward the house, which is around the bend that we just turned. He says hello again, and she just turns her head and stares at us for a second with black eyes. Writing this, I'm getting chills everywhere. She stares back straight and goes around the bend. Erin looks at me in shock and says, I'll run around the bend and check to try to talk to her or something. I sprint around the corner and there's no one there. She couldn't have gone more than 10 meters, and it's a long straight. I come back and he says, well? I say no one's there. Without a word, we sprinted the rest away to his house and just told his parents. What the hell was this? We still talk about it to this day. I encountered an otherworldly being. I went on this hike as a spiritual journey in Denver, Colorado. I was there to attend the PS 2023 conference. I decided to hike alone and wander around the Rocky Mountains. I took some mushrooms and planned on some weed later on, too. The hike was amazing, and I got so many beautiful pictures. I was hiking for hours before I started heading down towards a pond that a sign pointed to. It was a lot more walking than I thought, and being under the influence with night approaching, I began to worry. I pressed on and found my desired location, and was rewarded with one of the most beautiful views I'd ever seen. It wasn't long after I arrived that I strangely heard a name being called. It was my brother and his girlfriend on the top of the cliff. They somehow found me. They didn't even come with me to this location, although they did know I was there, roughly. We talked for a bit and I felt reassured that I was safe. So I decided to smoke the weed that I had. I did a dance to honor the spirits that guided my journey. As I was leaving, I decided to take one last photo with my phone. I pointed it at my brother and his girlfriend on the cliff and took it. After I saw the picture, I zoomed in because I was curious what it would look like, and I saw an eye-looking shape. I had a feeling that a being of overwhelming power was watching me. And when I looked up from my phone, I saw those eyes and the trees and the sky all around me. I started walking and words filled my head. Don't doubt the power, it kept repeating. My footsteps grew heavy and I began feeling like my heart might give out. I stopped and sat on the rock not far from where I took the picture. I looked up and I saw the moon between two evergreen trees. I asked the moon for protection and performed a makeshift ritual, as I believed it might help if I asked the moon to use me as her tool to aid myself and humanity. I actually felt the moon take control of my body, and I entered a trance, but I got too scared and broke out of it. It was wild. I met up with my brother after waiting on a different rock near the car, and I got deja vu. But it was different. I saw an alternate reality of sorts where I died in that moment, but it was more like I remembered I died at that moment. My heart hurt the rest of the night, and sometimes I still get pain. I've gone to the doctor about it, but they say I'm fine. What do you guys think of this? I haven't had anything bad happen to me so far, and since then, I feel like I'm in good standing with all the forces I interact with. Nothing really changed since then. I know it's easy to write this off as a psychedelic illusion with a weird picture artifact, but I'm not sure I personally can do that. That all felt so purposeful. I have no doubt that if I had been sober, this might not have happened the way it did. But my purpose on this walk was to grow spiritually. I paid respects, I danced wildly, I asked for guidance, and at the very end I saw it. We know very little about psychedelics in humans, They've been using him to communicate with otherworldly beings since the shamans. Maybe even before then. I might be crazy, but I just wanted to share this with someone. Shadow people helping me. Firstly, I'd like to clarify that I've always had sleep paralysis as a kid, so I know the difference between sleep paralysis and hallucinations, and realistic dreams and reality. I just want to make sense of what happened to me. The house I live in is actively haunted sometimes, and everyone shares a different story. But in this post, I'll be talking about two that stood out to me. Keep in mind that in both scenarios, I slept with all my lights off, so it was either completely dark or very minimal illumination from outside my computer or keyboard. 1. I used to date someone whom I suspect was a sociopath. He lied about his ex having cancer and dying, although she was still alive just away for college. Before I had any suspicions of this, one night he slept over and it was completely dark in my room, except from the moonlight peeking through the windows. I woke up in a sleep paralysis, and at the foot of my bed was a shadow figure whose body was outlined by the moonlight. It was pointing at the guy and saying, "Get away," repeatedly. I woke up and shrugged it off, spooked, but I brushed it off and found out 3 days later that his girlfriend was alive. For all those wondering, yeah, I got away. Fast forward a year, got rid of my old bed and switched to a bunk bed so I can have a desktop set up in my room. 2. I woke up one night randomly. I don't know if it was because my body sensed something in my room or if it was my cat, but I sat up to pet my cat, and in the corner of my eye, it looked like a shadow person standing in the corner of the room watching me and my cat. I immediately started rationalizing it, pinching myself, rubbing my eyes, telling myself it's a shadow from the stuff on my desk in front of my keyboard. But the outline of the shadow person was way too sharp for being that far away from my keyboard. And my ladder certainly couldn't have made that figure. It was shaped like a person. Strangely enough, this was also when I had someone sleeping over. This time it was my girlfriend. I kept on looking at it and then back at my friend, but I was too scared to wake her up because I didn't want its presence to be confirmed or have her freak out. My cat wasn't scared and was looking at it too, so I just pretended I didn't notice it and forced myself to go back to sleep. I'm no longer friends with said girl anymore. Nothing bad happened, but she's in a bad relationship and it just started to affect me. Needless to say, I do not sleep in the complete dark anymore. I also used to be super spiritual. I practiced tarot cards, lit certain candles during certain full moon phases. But it was all harmless and a way for me to deal with trauma. Since the first experience, I haven't touched my occult items. Does anyone have any knowledge or experience on shadow people warning you about people specifically? Something that happened before I was born. So my mom is seriously mentally ill and does genuinely hallucinate. Some of the stuff I've seen too, or at least seen enough evidence of where I think sometimes she genuinely does see things. I've wondered. So to keep it brief, I ended up going through years of child abuse and suicide attempts starting as a young kid after I was born. I was wanted very much though. I was the miracle baby that came out of fertility issues, ironically enough. When my mom was pregnant with me, she went to sleep one night and woke up with an odd sensation something was wrong. There was a tall figure standing over the foot of her bed with a long, dark robe. She couldn't see the face. She oddly didn't feel afraid, just watched as it pointed at her, and then at me, still in the womb. It went away after a minute. She still doesn't know why she wasn't scared, but knew inside it was something to do with me. I'm curious as to what people have to say on that. Throughout my whole life, I've seen so much death and so much trauma. I've always been into darker things as well. I've escaped my old home now and actually embraced my weird interests. I collect old antiques. I love gothic horror. And I've been linked with the darker art and interests. I model for artwork, and I'm usually painted in something intense or supernatural. I express my life experiences through my art and life. Oddly, death has become a part of my life, and it's a part of what has made me get as far as I have with my work. People associate me with it artistically, but on a philosophical way that fascinates people. I always wondered if this was connected to what my mother saw. Is this happening to anybody else? For the past 2 nights in a row, something very strange has been happening to me. I'm going to try to explain it the best that I can. I usually always sleep on my left side, which puts me facing the wall with my back to the rest of my room. Now, I usually have no problem doing this as it's the main way I sleep, but for some reason starting 2 nights ago, I just can't. When I'm facing the wall, I get this really strange feeling that something's behind me, which makes me sleep on my right side facing my room with my back to the wall. I must be rolling over in my sleep because I wake up facing the wall again. Okay, now for the strange part. Now this is hard to explain, but please bear with me. 2 nights ago I was asleep. I was not dreaming, but I was asleep. It was like 4 in the morning, and I got this awful feeling that someone was standing behind me. I'm facing the wall at this point, and then I swear I heard a man whispering. I couldn't make out a word that he was saying, but I could hear it. I hadn't felt so scared in a long time. I kept trying to make myself move, but I couldn't. It felt as though I was pushing myself to the point that I thought I was going to hit the wall next to me. Finally, my body gets up and I scan the room and nothing's there. It happened again last night. There was no whispering this time, but I got the same awful feeling and I just kept hearing in my head, "Something's behind you, something's behind you, something's behind you," over and over. Again, it was a struggle to move my body, and finally I got up and once again I scanned my room, and nothing was there. I'm currently living with my mom and she believes in ghosts. So the first night this happened to me, I told her. She believed me and was just like, "Yep, that's creepy." I went to tell her this morning that it happened again, but when I saw her, she told me that it happened to her last night too. She said, "It felt like something was standing over me, but I couldn't open my eyes." Has this happened to anybody here? What's going on? I really don't want this to happen again tonight. Looking for advice. I used to have bad sleep paralysis when I was an adolescent, which I managed to stop after a confrontation from ages 7 to 9 or maybe 10. But since then, I had no significant dreams until around maybe 13, which I had a dream where I was able to control it first, and currently still is the only dream I've had where I could control it, even though the control only lasted about a minute. But recently, I'm now 24, I had this dream where I wasn't able to wake myself up. I always am able to wake myself up by moving my toes, fingers, or calling to Santa Muerte. This didn't work this time. It wasn't like the other times. It's like my arms and legs were able to move in my head. That isn't a typo. I was able to move one arm, but my other arm, which is on my chest, was stuck by some intense pressure. There is always a shadow on my torso near my abdomen with a defined face. Despite being a show, you could tell the face's jaw and cheeks and shaped head, while other was chest near without any features, just black. Then I heard a female voice in a British accent say a couple of lines which I could make out, but I heard one chance or something along those lines. That was a couple of days ago. I then had another dream yesterday which was short and just had the same paralysis thing where I could move my arms and legs, but it was like my chest was locked to the bed. What was chasing my sheep last night? I had an experience last night. My sister and I were out on the back porch with the dogs when our sheep, which we keep in the yard right next to the dogs, started running around like they were being chased. I thought maybe our herding dog, who we keep in the barn about a half-mile down the road, had gotten down here somehow and was bothering them. So I turned on my phone's flashlight. The sheep were huddled in the corner near the dogs at this point. I didn't see anything. After waiting a few minutes, the quote-unquote dog didn't start chasing them again, so I turned off my flashlight. A bit after I did, they started running again, so I turned my light back on and again saw nothing. Turned it back off and they ran back to their original corner. This continued for a bit until one time when my light was off and I saw a curly black dog's tail silhouetted against our white truck. Aha! Problem solved. It's exactly what our herd dog's tail looks like. So obviously it's her. At this point I turned my light back on. Didn't see her, and I kept it on. I called her name and she didn't come, which was a bit weird. She's a very obedient dog, even if she does get excited and overheard the sheep. I keep calling her name, and then eventually the sheep ran from the corner that they were in and across the yard again. I hadn't seen the dogs scare them, but whatever, they were near the edge of the yard where a relatively small border collie could easily hide in the shadows. The sheep kept running to and from different corners as if being spooked, and I just kept, perhaps, quote-unquote, just missing the dog getting to where they would be scaring them in the direction that they were running. Actual weird stuff. Then it started getting a little weird. The sheep ran back to the corner near the dog yard, and this time I saw a black llama shape. Again, partially silhouetted by the car, or I thought I saw the dog's tail earlier. We have a black baby llama in that yard, so I thought, oh, she's chasing the sheep. She's always been very friendly with the sheep and calm, unlike our grown llama who is not in the yard. But maybe she learned from the adult. But then, this is the unexplainable part. The sheep ran from that, again, fully illuminated corner they were in. I didn't see the llama do anything to scare them. In fact, I can't see her anymore, but okay. But then the sheep ran from their new corner as if the llama chased them from there too, when there is no way she could have gotten to that corner without me seeing her. Llamas are big. At this point, I can clearly hear the llama's hoofbeats, and I have no idea how I ever thought it was a dog chasing them, but this is hilarious. Our sweet llama fucking terrorizing the sheep in the middle of the night. So I pull out my camera and I record. I can't see the llama on the screen at all, but she's all black, so I guess the phone just isn't picking her up even with the flash. The sheep keep running across the same stretch of grassy area, presumably chased by the llama. I can't see her chasing them, which is odd, since she's so big, but that side of the yard's darker, so I'm probably just overlooking her. But then, the sheep ran again, and this time directly across the completely clear area and into the corner where there's just dirt. It's great. Even if it was a fucking squirrel chasing them, I'll be able to see it this time. But then they run from that corner, and I see absolutely no other animal. Definitely not the llama, Not even a raccoon. Nothing could have gotten in that corner to scare them back without me seeing it. Plus, now that I'm looking around the yard to see what I missed, I see the llamas in the very back. There's a small chute that leads to more of the yard, which the sheep never went into. I would have seen the llama leave. What the fuck? Then after the sheep stop in a new corner, I hear hoofbeats. These hoofbeats are loud, hella loud, and fast. They sound like a horse galloping. At this point, I freak out because there's no way a horse got in there, and I didn't see it. Both of our horses are red, unlike the dog and the llama. So that's it. No way am I doing this. I go inside the house and bring the dogs with me. Don't go back out the rest of the night. I went down to the barn this morning, and the horses and the dogs were all in there. No holes in the fences. No way they could have gotten out and back in. Now, these are very calm sheep. We specifically have them down here instead of at the barn because they won't get spooked by the dogs. They're the old sheep. They're not prone to getting spooked or running around for no reason, and in fact, are quite lazy. Again, old. The place they were running from made it clear that whatever was chasing them was in the yard, not outside of it. Sometimes they would run from the center of the yard. The yard they're in, it's small, the size of a suburban home's backyard. My flashlight illuminated everywhere they ran except for the very edges, which again weren't the only places they were running from. We have a new strong fence keeping them in that wild animals can't get through unless it's very small, like a squirrel or a lizard or a raccoon or a gecko, or literally broke the fence down. It's not broken down, and the animal that I saw and heard at the end was clearly larger than even the sheep. It looked the size of our grown llama who's not in that yard. It sounded like one of our horses galloping. My house is haunted? ? I'm a skeptic, and a really big one. So when I say this freaked me out like no other, I'm telling the truth. I'm a late night kind of person. I was already watching ghost stories and stuff like that. Even if I'm a skeptic, it freaks me out, don't know why. But anyways, I went to brush my teeth at around 3:30 in the morning. I thought to myself, would be kind of weird if something happened right about now. My bathroom has a weird setup. So the first door leads to the sink and mirror, then another door leads to the bath and toilet. The toilet has a door right next to it too, and that leads to the master bedroom. And right after I thought about something weird happening, I heard a small bang. I can't really describe it, but I look over and a dress that's hanging on the door to the master bedroom was swinging, as if somebody had touched it. Okay, it's a little weird, but then the door slowly opened and it was fully closed. That door takes a considerable amount of pressure to open. It doesn't latch properly, but either way it would take a human force to open it. When that happened, I no joke said, "Nope, fuck that." I said that out loud, and I closed the door leading to that room, and I saw the door open. Now my girlfriend's grandmother died in the hallway leading to where I was standing at, in the sink, and we found her. I'm not really sure if that would have any connection, though. A couple of months prior, I also had another weird event happen, where my girlfriend and I were sitting in our room, and her diploma was sitting on her dresser, standing up for months. Then, all of a sudden, it just fell over. It was weird, but I thought something might explain it away, but what happened in that bathroom is what really makes me think about my skepticism. I checked for anything that could cause that dress and door to open, but couldn't find anything. Weird experience. For some context, I live in farm country, USA. I have for almost 10 years. I regularly have to go outside in the pitch black with just a flashlight to check on animals and weird noises. I don't scare easily being outside at night because my attention and calmness is essential for keeping my animals and myself safe. I have neighbors, but they're driving distance away, or you would definitely see them coming if they walked. No one would sneak up on someone at night out here for obvious reasons. So this is what happened. I was outside on Halloween night around 10:30 p.m. I was outside with my dog checking animals and letting her potty before bed. We were about 6 yards from my house and I hear a hoot, hoot, hoot. I instantly was covered in goosebumps and the hair on my arms stood up. It sounded like a human hooting like an owl. It didn't even have reverb or natural range of a normal owl. I stopped walking and looked around thinking it's Halloween and it's probably my husband messing with me. I don't see anything outside. I look at my phone and it doesn't show that a door or window is open for my husband to be making that noise. I'm on guard but keep walking with my dog. I then hear hoot, hoot, hoot again. I look around with my flashlight, looking for eyes or a person or something. Nothing. It was pretty bright outside from the moon, so I should have been able to see an owl, especially because we don't really have trees. We have a few structures where an owl could perch, but it would have to be perched on the top of one of these structures. I'm more anxious now, and I start to turn heading back to the house. My dog and I get about halfway to the house, and I hear hoot, hoot, hoot again. For whatever reason, I go into a full panic, and I hurry inside. I look through the doors, and I go to my bedroom, and I ask my husband if he's messing with me. He's dead asleep, already snoring. I checked all the cameras around our property, don't see anything. But I spent the rest of the night on edge thinking somebody was going to break in. I wouldn't think anything of this except my body went into full alert mode when I first heard the hoots. We have a few packs of coyotes that live around us, and I'm very often outside when they start howling at each other. I'm also a long-distance runner, and run these country roads every day, miles from anybody. And I run into all sorts of animals. I don't panic or react the way that I did from the sound of an owl. Or that owl. That's what makes me think this might be a paranormal experience of some sort. Has anyone ever heard something like this? What happened to me? Paranormal encounter. When I was a freshman in college, I lived in a notoriously haunted dorm that was basically a repurposed apartment building that was around 100 years old. One night after I laid down and closed my eyes to sleep, I was suddenly bombarded by black and white off-colored images that were most definitely somebody else's memories. One I distinctly remember. It was a young boy with swim goggles and pool floaties laughing and looking up at me. There was also this weird surge of energy. I felt specifically this in my ears. Then I was suddenly in my dorm room, but it looked entirely different to the way I had it, and there was a portrait of a man that seemed to come alive and look back at me. I was so overwhelmed. And then when I opened my eyes, the man was standing over me at my bedside. He was hazy and transparent, and then I physically felt and saw his energy flow into me, and it felt like I was being electrocuted. But in a good way. There was no pain, just energy, a lot of it. I was so scared for a full minute I thought I was possessed. Can someone explain to me what the hell happened? And for context, I come from a long line of female fortune tellers and the spiritually sensitive, both of which I don't consider myself to be, but I've never really experienced anything on this level before. I would ask someone from your family in that case. The Hatman. This happened to me when I was 8, but I still remember it vividly. I was in Denver staying at a hotel with my sister, my brother, and my parents. This hotel room was a little odd. It was separated into 2 rooms by a wall and a door. One of the rooms had 2 beds and the other room had a couch and a TV. Almost like a living room. The room with beds had no doors, besides the one that separates the living room and the room itself. The living room was where you enter the hotel room itself. The living room was also where the bathroom was located. So our second day staying there, my parents went somewhere, leaving my brother, my sister, and myself alone there. My brother went to go use the restroom, and me and my sister were watching TV in the room that had the beds in it. The door that separated the 2 rooms was open all the way, so you could see the living room and the entrance to the hotel room itself. While we were watching TV, this big burst of light came from the entrance, and the sound of it opening. And out emerges, I would say, about a 6'5" man coming out of it. He was nothing but pure darkness, no light reflected off of him, just pitch black. He wore what appeared to be a trench coat and a fedora. He also carried a briefcase. I could not distinguish any other features besides this. He turned his head toward me and my sister for about 5 seconds before turning away. He walked a couple more feet before disappearing instantly, along with that bright light that was emitting from the entrance. After he disappeared, me and my little sister started crying and started screaming for my brother. A couple of years later, I looked it up and found other people had a similar experience, but saw that thing while in sleep paralysis. Unlike that, me and my sister were awake when that happened. Entity that manifested as a fear. This story goes back to when I was 10 years old. I was home alone during the summer at night. To kind of explain the setup of my home to paint a better picture, we had a family computer that sat in our living room. From this point of view where the computer sits, you can see the kitchen to the right and a glass sliding door that leads into the backyard on your left. I don't exactly recall the time, but it was really dark out, and my parents were out for the evening. Like most 10-year-olds at the time, I enjoyed playing computer games like Club Penguin in my free time. So there I was playing Club Penguin when I heard a loud pop. It was about as loud as a balloon pop. I looked to my left where the glass sliding door is, and right pressed up against it, I see a clown. At the time, I used to have a really big fear of them, like huge. This freaked me out big time, but as soon as it appeared, it disappeared, and it turned into a white mist of some sort. I remember sprinting to my parents' room and just waiting for them to be home. I never said a word to them about it, at least when it happened, because I had a good feeling they wouldn't believe me. Fast forward a few months later after the first encounter, and it happened again. I was at the computer, and it came as fast as it left. I'd forgotten all about this experience like I mentioned earlier, and I haven't had any experience like that ever again. Looking back, though, I think it could have been an entity of some sort disguised as a fear of mine. Or maybe an overactive imagination, who knows. Open to hearing theories. That's the end of them. See you later. Welcome to the world of the unknown at Paranormal M, where we bring you stories that'll challenge your perception of reality. Subscribe and turn on notifications, and even leave a comment to help us with this algorithm, so that way we can keep these daily stories coming and keep you connected with our latest mysterious tales. We hope you're prepared for a spine-tingling journey. Something is coming back. For the last maybe 10 years since we lived in my house, we've had a lot of activity. Mainly at that time since a lot of negative stuff was happening. My mom and dad's divorce, my grandpa in the hospital passing away. That house made us all depressed and angry. So I'm sure something was manifested with the negative energy that we had around us constantly. I won't go into too much detail, but my mom has always seen shadow people. They've followed her around. She's had dreams. She's seen things physically. I was never able to see them manifesting, but I always had feelings of something being around me. I would hear the knocks most of the time, and other stuff I mainly forgot. I'm not sure how long this has been going on now, but the activity is starting to become more prominent. The taps are turning on. I felt the presence of something being around me in the house, knocking outside of mine in my mom's room. We both just spoke, and we managed to reenact it perfectly. Now my mom is seeing and hearing the shadow person talk in a more detailed way. She was beginning to fall asleep in her room before she heard a man say, "Book." My mom and my dog both jumped at the same time before she started to hear what sounded like a cat scratching inside of her closet, furthest away from her. That corner of her room has always freaked me out in some way. There's something so eerie about it, and I can't explain what. But the noise came from that specific corner of her room, in her closet. She described it as a cat scratching itself. However, we do have 3 cats, but the sound perspective of it was coming from inside her room, and no cats were in her room, just the dog. She spoke to it and asked it if it could do something else, and it knocked over a bag. Nothing has happened to me, at least in my room or anything related to me, but I've heard stuff and seen taps being left on. I do brush it off and think that it's nothing, but to be frank, I'm scared of the unknown. I have no idea who it could be, or what it could be. The entity who used to visit me at night as a child. When I was a boy, I used to endure the odd, strange experience. But this one was by far the most frightening. This occurred during the early 90s, in the years between 1993 and 94. So I was about 3 or 4 years of age. I only vaguely remember any of this, but my father every once in a while never fails to bring it up. And he reminds me that there's more to this world than what we see with our eyes. To him, this happened as if it were yesterday. My father told me there was once a period of time when I was a child that I used to run out of my room in the dead of night to my parents' room where he and my mother would be sleeping. I would burst into their room frantically screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, I'm seeing monsters, there's monsters in my room." My father being a very religious, spiritual man, and no stranger to seeing some weird shit growing up in his homeland of Africa, he would take me by the hand and back into my room and show me that there was nothing there. He would turn on the light, say a prayer for good measure, and tell me everything is fine. But I would always refuse to go back to sleep in my room, and I would beg to stay in my parents' room for the remainder of the night until he obliged. This same scenario happened another 3 times, and on the last time my father had finally had enough and took me back into my bedroom and decided to stay with me for the night to see what, if anything, was tormenting me like this. I ended up falling asleep not long afterwards, my childish brain probably assuming I was safe now that my father was staying with me. Only around 20 minutes had passed when my father first saw it. The light was on and my father said he saw a huge black mass that reached the ceiling and it had the shape of a very tall man. He was in complete shock at the sight of this thing and actually tried to move suddenly, He immediately noticed his whole body was paralyzed, as if whatever the thing was had inflicted some sort of self-induced paralysis on him. The entity then turned around slowly and revealed where my father assumed its head was. There were two small bright red lights which my father assumed were its eyes. My father was scared witless but shook off his fears, coming to the realization that it was most probably this horrible entity that had been troubling me, his son. Anger then replaced fear, and my father, with all his will and his might, tried to break out of his paralysis state, and suddenly the entity turned again and walked out of the room. It was extremely surreal. The most disturbing part of this, at least to me, was this following part. Our rooms were all upstairs in our house. My father told me that when the entity left the room, he then heard the footsteps of the thing walking down the stairs alongside the creaking of the stairs and all of it. For some reason, that part of the story always gives me the chills. I have later in my life experienced some strange occurrences, but not of this magnitude. I've found that I have quite an active sixth sense. For example, I am sensitive to people's energy, and I can tell if they are a good or a bad person, or just having sharp instincts and intuition, and find that when I heed them, positive things happen to me, and when I don't, negative things seem to follow. Just left a haunted air bed and breakfast. We do a Friendsgiving trip every year, and this is in early November. There's generally 15 or so people that go, so we always split the cost of a really nice Airbnb. We arrived on Friday night, moved in all of our stuff, and proceeded to have a good night. The next day was fun, playing group games and drinking and all that. Last night was our last night there, and we were all in the upstairs living room watching Netflix movies. I decided that I wanted to smoke some weed, so I went downstairs, grabbed my bong, smoked a bowl, came in and locked the door behind me. Then my belly started rumbling, if you catch my drift. There's a bathroom down the hallway downstairs, so I decided to do my business away from everyone else. About 4 seconds after I locked the door and started to sit down on the toilet, there was a very obvious force against the door, and the handle shoved down hard. Then nothing. I thought it was my girlfriend messing with me, so I yelled out. Got no response. I wasn't going really scared at this point, because I was figuring that it was somebody messing with me. So I yelled out, "Okay, fuck you, I'm coming out with a knife then." I had no such knife. I finished my business, waited a few minutes till I was comfortable to leave, went upstairs, and immediately asked, "Okay, who fucked with me in the bathroom?" Nobody said anything, and that nobody was downstairs but me. Nobody tried to use the bathroom I was in. There was 5 people in the house. And apparently, they all heard a huge gust of wind when I was in the bathroom. The whole thing had me really spooked, and I'm glad to be home. My brother can see jinns. So my brother, 14 at the time, went to a wedding function with my parents. Now keep in mind, bad jinns are usually found in places that are dirty and unsanitary. Now, the way to the location of the function is not the most lit, streetlight-wise, and it's pretty sketchy. Now everything is fine while going to this event as at 6 or 7 p.m., but while leaving the venue around 12 or 1 a.m., my brother exited the venue a little earlier than my parents, as they were greeting everybody goodbye. Now, after a while later, when my parents reach my brother, they see him shaking and on the verge of tears. They are aware that he sees or senses djinns, as kind of happened in the past. So they sensed something was wrong and left the place as fast as they could. My brother was sobbing all the way home, and once they reached home, he kept repeating, "I saw something in there. There was something at that spot." Now we just prayed for him, and we went to bed like usual. Fast forward to the next day. He goes to school like usual, and when he comes back, he goes to shower, and amidst that, he calls out to Mom, stating that his back is burning. Due to the shower gel, mostly. Now, what she saw still gives me goosebumps. Scratch marks all across his back. Not just small scratches that can happen when you itch too hard. These were stretched out from the upper back to the lower back, red and irritated. Now, as soon as we saw it, we called home Imam, a religious expert, and he confirmed that there was a negative presence that had come along with him home. Visions/visitor. When I was around 6 years old, me and my family moved to an apartment in the UK as a placeholder before we could move into our new house. A lot of unexplainable things happened while I lived there. I remember the first night it happened. I heard the sounds of fast footsteps, and as it got closer, the whole room started to rumble more and more aggressively the closer it got, and I could feel myself shaking internally too. It was a tall, dark, bat-like figure with yellow eyes, and either had long horns or really long ears that curved all the way back, almost to its neck, with wings like a bat, but stood upright and built like a human. The first time it happened, I was terrified and asked to swap beds with my sister so I wouldn't be able to see it run past my room. My sister slept through it each time and had no idea it was even happening. I told my parents about this thing that visited, and they told me and showed me that the lock's on the door and that there was no way anyone or anything could come in, and, of course, that it was safe. It kept on happening, and the rumblings of these footsteps kept waking me up as it ran around the house at night. It woke me up each time, and sometimes I would look out the door into the corridor to see if it was really the same creature visiting me, and eventually got used to it and learned to ignore the rumbling and try to go back to sleep. There was one night in particular where I had an out-of-body experience. I wound up following that thing around the apartment. It ran so fast, and I followed it where my parents kept their wallets and credit cards, and I watched it scratch them all up. Then it left straight after. The next morning I told my mom what it did, but of course, she didn't believe me. We went grocery shopping that same day. My mom went to pay with her card, but it kept declining and all the other ones didn't work either. And I looked at my mom and said, "I told you someone was in the apartment last night. I warned you he was messing with our cards." But she said nothing, probably out of shock that whatever I saw became true the next day. It never came back after that, and I've never seen it since, and I have no explanation of what this thing was or what it was doing. I met a couple of unique but creepy beings. So I was a child writer. I became a millionaire at a young age. I mentioned this because it is said that vampires favor the rich. Due to child abuse, I never really got any sleep and always had nightmares and sleep paralysis. I've had really bad bullies, but for the most part, I've always been welcomed, especially because I used to be rich. Anyways, the first entity that I met was a doppelganger who didn't have a reflection. He was on my friend's front porch when I opened the door. At first, I thought my friend had a twin brother. When I was confronted by this doppelganger, it was more like a djinn. It had a really big, friendly smile on its face. So after my nerves cleared up, I extended my hand, and he shook my hand. He appeared out of nowhere, so I assumed that he either was a shapeshifter or had lightning speed or both. But all in all, this entity was a living, breathing being that needed love. It makes me believe that in the next life, maybe I'll have those same powers. Or maybe he'll remember me. The second entity that I came across was a reptilian woman. I met her in an exclusive New York City hospital. I noticed her first, got some really good staring in, but when she noticed me, she gave me the most evil look that made my mind black out. Meeting her was just like meeting that doppelganger. Both were young like me, both were having fun like me, and both were very different. I had thought I saw it all until I saw these two. Three knocks. This happened a long time ago, and I think about it every once in a while. I was moving out of an old uni house I shared with some friends. Tenancy was nearly up, so most people had already moved out. I went down to the house one night with my then boyfriend to pack up some stuff. We checked the rooms out in the house to see who had already moved out, and most people had left, but there was nobody home anyway. My boyfriend took some stuff out to the car, whilst I stayed upstairs packing the rest of my stuff up in my room. I was pulling the bed out to check nothing was left down on the side. Then I heard the three loudest knocks on my bedroom door. I turned to look at the door and said hello. Stupid automatic reaction, but I would have shit myself if someone other than my boyfriend had answered. Nobody did answer. There were no signs of movement on the landing or shadows of the person on the wall, as my door was slightly ajar. And I just thought it was him messing around with me, so I looked at the door for a minute, expecting him to come in. Then when I heard him shut the door outside, and then come back into the house downstairs at the front door, I shouted him upstairs and told him that what had happened, and we locked up, left very quickly, because we both felt really uneasy. It also felt like something was watching us leave the house. Can't explain it. I went back for the rest of my things the next day in daylight. Nothing else happened. Neighbor dog. Freaking out. Stops us and done with the story though. Neat. Saw something strange on my window earlier this morning. Had really weird dreams, too. Today, shortly after waking up, brushing my teeth, hair, and all that stuff, I saw a really fucking strange thing on my window. It was hard to describe, so bear with me here. It was like a back of a bald person's head, except a person with a really big head and no hair at all. It was completely smooth and wasn't really shaped like a head. To make it worse, it seemed to just be staring at my brother. When I saw it, I was legit just paralyzed. I couldn't make out any words. I just kept saying, "What?" But it didn't react. It was only when I tried calling my brother's name that the thing immediately left, seemingly in a panic. Worst part, it made noise. It made fucking noise. It wasn't just hallucinating like I thought I was. The only noise that it made was it hitting the window. which is weird because getting close to that window as the first place is pretty difficult and only really feasible by someone extremely slim like myself. That's because right by the window is our family car, which didn't make any noise at all. And in Brazil, where I'm from, our houses are like little fortresses. We have really big gates to protect us from home invasions, which are still somewhat common. Although you can break into a house here, you would make a ton of noise, enough for you to be noted. But I didn't hear a thing. To top it off, today is Children's Day in Brazil. I've been having a ton of nightmares. A notable one is where like half the country is just gone. And by gone, I don't mean like turned into the ocean. I mean just straight up gone. Gone in a black void. Anyone could have any idea what this was about? I'll ask my brother when he wakes up and ask him if he has any recollection of the event whatsoever. Possible UFO/UAP encounter. Please help. I watched a UFO/UAP video about a week ago, and one particular segment has really stuck with me, and I need help with it. In a nutshell, the segment talked about people who've had encounters with some sort of craft that, for lack of a better analogy, had what looked like disco lights underneath. Specifically, the people who had these encounters found themselves drawn to it, and as they got closer, and eventually underneath, we were greeted by a colorful display of lights. As soon as I saw an artist's interpretation of these types of encounters, I was taken back to being a kid of maybe 8 or 9 years old. I remembered having feelings of awe looking up at these lights, and the lights themselves, but I don't remember the context, and as much as I tried, I haven't. Now, I consider myself a skeptical believer. I used to believe in aliens, ghosts, the Loch Ness Monster, and everything else as a kid. Apparently, when I was a baby, I was particularly sensitive to areas where death had occurred. As an adult, at some point, I stopped believing. Although this was despite having other encounters of varying types, and it's only in the past couple of years I've found myself accepting what I've experienced as actual events. But this I can't decipher in my head. There's too many blank spots with it, which is a bit odd, because my memory tends to be pretty good. I'm autistic, so there's a lot of things that are heavily ingrained in my memory starting from about 3 years old. What can I do to figure this out? Either something happened, which would be odd because I wouldn't have been outside the house at night, or it was the disco lights at the club my grandparents used to own that I used to frequently turn on when the club was closed. Thing is, I remember those times too, and this particular memory invokes a different type of feeling. My experience in the body freezer. This can't be good. I'll try to keep this story as I can, at least as short as I presumably can. A year or so ago, I went ghost hunting with my dad at an abandoned psychiatric hospital that was active in the early 1900s. Of course, because it was the 1900s, a lot of people were mistreated and even killed in that facility. To me, it seemed to be more like they were doing human experimentation, more so than providing psychiatric services. Me and my dad went there with a group of roughly 10 novice paranormal investigators and 5 genuinely experienced professionals. I'd never done any paranormal investigation, and was primarily doing it so I could accurately represent ghosts in my horror writings. Around halfway through the investigation, we came across a morgue. The professionals leading our group had been given keys to the facility and offered to unlock the body freezers and let us go inside and close it. I was the only person who volunteered to go in, and I don't know what to think about what happened. Since I was a child, I've been a bit of an empath. Everybody around me has had some sort of aura around them, and I can almost 100% accurately read the feelings and intentions of those around me. It's worth noting for this story that never have I begun feeling as if I was feeling somebody else's emotions when I was alone. As soon as that body freezer shut, I felt extremely intense feelings as if I was standing face to face with somebody who was angry and hopeless, lost and confused. It's worth noting the temperature dropped drastically when I entered despite the body freezers obviously being off. It didn't scare me, it just made me feel sad. If this was a ghost, it was a ghost of somebody who died here, and feeling what they felt made me want to break down and cry. I know me being an empath and all is not all that concrete evidence for the paranormal, but I wanted to share this for anybody willing to hear it. Am I haunted? I want to preface this by admitting I've always been a bit of a skeptic. I will rarely admit outright that something seems paranormal, but I do have to concede when things are strange and I don't have an explanation. I feel a little hypocritical coming to the subreddit to share my experience, but I really can't explain this one. For some context, my hometown is weird. I won't go into too much detail so as not to dox myself, but I will say that people give seasonal haunted tours of the city, and it has a long local history of strange things and people coming from here. Growing up here, I learned things like hiking trails leading to different places at different times of day, and to always be respectfully silent if you go into the props basement of the local theater. That's just how things are around here. It wasn't strange to me until I went to college halfway across the state. My first roommate in school was very superstitious. They claimed to be very good at detecting ghosts, and would tell me all sorts of spooky stories about supposedly haunted buildings that they'd gone to. I didn't really put much stock in it, but I remember them claiming that there was a presence in our dorm room after I moved in. They complained of cold spots, feeling watched, things falling from the walls, and phantom footsteps. I chalked the things falling and phantom footsteps up to us living in a dorm room which has active neighbors and didn't really care to explain the rest. I was almost never in the dorm anyway, preferring to do my studying elsewhere on campus. Several months later I moved out. I got my first apartment side by side with a new roommate. They're superstitious as well, but less so than my first roommate. They never outright suggested that we had ghosts, but they did point out that our apartment had strange quirks. Things we thought had stuck to the walls just fine would fall down, sometimes with more force than it seemed they should have. Doorways would get cold, and we would hear what sounded like footsteps crossing the living room and going into my bedroom. The front door would rattle in its place, seemingly at random. It was a pretty run-down building, so I shrugged it off as the building being old and not up to code on some things. Twice is a coincidence, but 3 times is a pattern. About a month and a half ago, I moved into a new apartment with my best friend. Every now and then we hear knocking at the front door, but no one is there. It's the same knocking each time, 2 quick taps. We get cold spots around the kitchen island and in our bedroom. If I close the bedroom door at night, it'll rather rattle in its frame just like the front door in the old apartment. To top it off, A few days ago, one of our neighbors from the apartment below ours dropped by to mention that we were walking around kind of loudly in the evenings. They just politely asked us to be a bit quieter. This wouldn't be an issue, except my partner and I aren't home in the evenings. They mentioned the footsteps usually being loud around 8 or 9 p.m., but we don't get home from work until about 11 p.m. at the earliest. The apartment should be empty. We haven't tried hanging anything on the walls yet, but I have a feeling if we did, it might not stay. My partner's starting to get a little freaked out, and I have to admit I'm stumped. I've checked for drafts, made sure the doors are all latched correctly, and done everything else I can think of to find a logical, non-paranormal explanation for what's going on. It wasn't until I started writing a post about it that I realized this was a pattern with places I've lived since moving out of my childhood home. My childhood home is as normal as any other old house in my neighborhood. It did used to creak as if someone were wandering around, but I've always assumed all old houses will do that. I never had issues putting up posters and never saw any rattling doors that I can remember. The only thing I can think of being uniquely odd was feeling watched when I was home alone or trying to sleep at night. But I'm a social person, so that could have just been regular old anxiety. Ghost cat. Every house my significant other and I have ever lived in has had some sort of strange occurrence. It's not constant, but it's fairly consistent, leading us to both now believe that there is no mundane explanations. The first place we lived together was by far the most active, and it's the first time that the cat appeared. Months into our new rental, we had experienced things that we tried to stay rational about. Heavy footsteps at night followed by furniture creaking as if somebody was sitting down on them. Battery-powered electronics occasionally turning on by themselves. Loud bangs coming from the garage at night. All of this was explained away. Battery-powered things act up sometimes. And it's just the house settling, right? Then one sunny afternoon, my significant other was watching TV and looked over to see the tail end of an orange tabby cat walk into the kitchen, bold as you please. It wasn't transparent, it wasn't gliding or spooky, it wasn't kind of an ordinary cat. It was just randomly in our house. My significant other just got up immediately and followed after it. But as you've already guessed, there was nothing there. Nothing at all. No place for it to hide in the kitchen either. It was as if it walked through a wall or evaporated. Needless to say, my significant other was shook up. Hearing noises is a world away from seeing something. A few years later, we were preparing to move out when it appeared again to my significant other. And again, only the tail end was seen, but this time it went out the back door. Like last time, my significant other went after it, but there's nowhere to be found. 3 years later, and all was calm and peaceful in our new house. One night, significant other and I were cleaning up after dinner when we both saw it. I was washing dishes, and significant other was headed out back to take out the trash. Upon opening the back door, significant other shouted to me that it's back. I looked out the kitchen window and saw the tail end of an orange tabby rounding the corner of the shed in the backyard. The whole experience was bizarre. When significant other shouted, I instinctively knew to look out the window. No idea why. And when I saw it, my mind told me that it's just a cat, but my body was chilled to the bone. If it's just a real cat, why is only the tail end ever seen? Significant other was amped up having someone else witness it, but I remained uneasy for days as I get the sense it wanted to be followed. We moved a year after the second sighting to the house that we live in now. It would be almost 5 years before our little friend appeared. But when it did, it was the same as before. Significant other walked into the garage and immediately saw 6 feet in front of him the tail end of the orange tabby walking around the short stack of boxes. My significant other closed the door behind him and started moving everything around looking for the cat to no avail. I haven't seen the cat again, but I get the sense it's here. From time to time, I'll notice the curtains are pulled aside a bit, as if it's looking out the window. Later, the curtains are back in place. Significant other is at work when this happens. No one else here but me. I'll hear loud chattering sounds coming from the kitchen like stuff was knocked over countertops, but nothing's ever found out of place. Neither of us have ever had an orange tabby. Wonder if this will go on forever. Childhood friend's haunted 1800s home. I had a friend in middle school, early 2000s. Their family lived in a very large home that was a bed and breakfast in the late 1800s to early 1900s. It was during the Prohibition era. The house had a ballroom and a bar on the second floor that was only accessible through a waist-high door and a closet, and this closet had to be crawled through to reach. Unfortunately, there was a fire in the ballroom, and due to the small door, many didn't make it out alive. The door inside the closet that led to the ballroom still exists, and I've seen it. But behind the door is just now drywall and the exterior to the home. I encountered spirits in this house often. My friend would mention that the spirits were most active while I was there. We would hear and feel things often. Footsteps descending the stairs when no one was home. A sudden cool rush of air when no windows were open. There was even one room in the house her dog refused to go inside of. The most intense experience I had in this house is a distinct memory that sticks with me 15 years later. My friend and I were in her bedroom getting ready for our track meet. This was broad daylight, around 3 p.m. We were doing our hair looking into a mirror, and the bedroom door was behind me and to my right. I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned, I saw a woman with her hair slicked back into a low bun, wearing a pink puffy sleeved gown. She was peering around the corner at us from the door and looked surprised, eyes wide, but curious. She was pale and opaque. I screamed and jumped onto my friend, and when I looked back, the woman was gone. When I calmed down and explained to my friend what I saw, she went pale and explained that a few nights prior, while she was washing her face in the bathroom, she reached for her hand towel and saw a pink blur rush along the open doorway when her eyes were open. This experience is the one that solidified my belief in the afterlife, ghosts, and the paranormal. I still remember the first paranormal experience I've had. My parents got divorced, so me and my mom moved into another city, which is my mom's hometown. In the summer of the same year, we spent several days in our family house. It belongs to my mom's brother. This was in the village. We were trying to find a place for ourselves in the city. My uncle wasn't there, but we were alone with my mom. The house is one floor, relatively big, with the main living room in the middle and other rooms were located around the main living room. There were not comfortable beds for us to sleep in, so we were sleeping on the couches in the main living room at that time. One night I saw a frightening nightmare. In that nightmare, I was sleeping on my own couch in the main living room, and I wasn't able to talk, move, scream, or go back to sleep. If you think it's sleep paralysis, keep on reading. I was conscious, but unable to do anything. Then I saw something that was coming out from the door, which is located right to the left foot side of my couch. It was a person covered with wet white bedsheet. It was tall, slowly walking, human-shaped. No holes or stains. It slowly made its way from my left foot side to my right foot side and then turned, approached my head side. It was so frightening to see it walking, and I thought I'm shaking in my bed, except for I wasn't able to move. That was the end of my nightmare. Next morning, I woke up to the sound of my mom cleaning. She was especially cleaning the floor next to my bed. When I asked her what happened, she said the floor was wet when she woke up. I couldn't process what happened, but I didn't freak out. I just got up and saw the wetness on the floor and said, "That's weird." After that night, I relieved myself with the idea that it could be happening because of the rain, maybe a broken pipe or something. It was a dry, hot night, and there were no pipelines close to the main living room in the house. Today, my mom still doesn't know anything about my nightmare and the water that came out of nowhere. My first ghost experience. I don't know how old I was. Probably 5 or maybe 7. I don't know. But anyways, we had a hall in our home, and the bathroom was at the end of that hall. I woke up one night and needed to use the bathroom. I got up and started walking towards the hall, but I stopped midway. I saw the figure. It was white. It was a man, and he was pretty tall, literally about to touch the ceiling or something. Skull emoji. It looked like he was wearing a suit, and he just stood there doing nothing. My memory is a bit blurry, but I think I tried touching the figure while I walked through it. When I looked back, all I saw was white mist and just kind of ran. The second time, again woke up at night to use the bathroom. He was there again, but he wasn't alone. There was a little boy next to him. Same thing, white figure with a suit. I was the same height as him, and I walked close, really close, but I didn't touch this time. I stared at the man and back at the boy, and I walked through them. When I walked through everything, it just felt cold and chills ran down my spine, and I looked back. Missed again. I never saw them after that night. Until 2 years ago. Different home, but this one also had a hall, but it was smaller. I was going to the bathroom. Again, laughing my ass off at night. Then I took a pause. The man was there, but this time he was at the end of the hallway. For some reason as a kid, I wasn't afraid of the man or boy. It felt like they weren't evil spirits, but when I recently saw the man, it sort of creeped me out. Almost like I wasn't safe. I ignored it, and after I did my business, I peeked at the end of the hallway before getting out of the bathroom. He had left. I've not seen him since. Man's voice talking to my nephew. My husband and I are house-sitting / babysitting for my sister and brother-in-law while they're out of town for the weekend. They have 2 children, 2 and 5. The 5-year-old has frequent nightmares and a tough time in general getting to sleep, at least most nights. Tonight, for example, he called down at least 4 times before this incident. I kept going upstairs to rub his back and read him one last story. Isn't it always the last book? Maybe 5 minutes after my last trip to give him another hug and a drink of water, my husband was looking for a game to play on my sister's new VR headset. This headset is brand new, and with just basic attachments and such. No headphones, so no sound came out of the headset, or headband, I guess, itself. I heard my nephew mumbling upstairs. I figured he was reading himself a story, followed by what sounded like a low male's voice speaking back to him. At first, I thought it must have been the VR headset, until my husband ripped off his head with a, "What the fuck was that?" I said I assumed it was his headset, but I swore I heard my nephew talking and a man's voice talking back to him. To which he replied, "That's exactly what I thought I heard." He hadn't even decided on a game for the headset, so no sound was even coming out. He begrudgingly went upstairs to check on my nephew, who was sound asleep. A kid that was wide awake 5 minutes prior, mind you. I know kids crash hard, so I'm not too suspicious about that, but how do we explain the voice? We checked all the doors and windows, everything's locked. We had 3 large dogs who are alert and love a reason to bark, like most dogs. They've been calm all night. I called my sister to ask if they'd heard anything, which she replied with a quick nope. But we're freaked out. How do we explain both hearing a very distinct low man's voice upstairs with what seemed like replying to my nephew? Their home is brand new and in an upper-class neighborhood. Not that that matters much when it comes to the paranormal. Husband and I are hearing one another's voices, but it's not us. A month or so ago, my husband came in from the garage late one night. We have a baby, so 10 p.m. is late for us, and we were literally shaking, arm hair all standing on end. He asked if I had been calling to him in the garage. Spoiler alert, I hadn't. I'd been in bed scrolling for 45 minutes in my own world. He was so freaked out. He swore he heard me calling him and even turned around to acknowledge me. I shrugged it off as weird, but didn't think much more of it. Last week, he was in the nursery rocking our son to sleep. I was in the living room rocking our son to sleep. I was in the living room, baby monitor on the right next to me. I hear what I think is him quietly saying, "Baby, baby, baby," over and over again, like he was trying to keep quiet, but still trying to get my attention. Sometimes we forget water or our phones or whatever before going into rock, so I figured he was in need. Before going into rock. I opened the nursery door to find baby nearly asleep in his arms and my husband on his phone. I whisper asking what he wanted, which he replied with a confused look. I went back to the living room and texted him asking if he needed me as I heard him calling. Nope, wasn't him. Couldn't have been a video I was hearing on the monitor. Anything that makes sound is not a wise choice while trying to get a baby to sleep. I don't know what to think. I've heard of mimics and I don't know much about them other than that they're really not so good spirits. I grew up in a haunted home, so I'm comfortable with some level of activity. But don't copy our voices. That's just not cool. Ask Reddit. My friend and I used to hike and camp up by French River in northern Ontario. For anyone unfamiliar with this area, it's extremely remote. You have to leave your car and canoe a few hours, then carry your canoe to your campsite. On this occasion, we were camping for 10 days. There were 4 of us, and we didn't see another person or any sign or anyone else near us. On day 3, we decided to wake up early and hike along the river going north. One of my friends was really good with maps and planning hikes for us, and he said that this one was about a 9-hour hike. and this was 9 hours there and back to our campsite. We started our hike at 6 a.m. and around noon stopped to swim for a bit in the river to cool off, followed by some lunch that we packed and a beer or two each. We started packing up again and noticed a small cabin off in the distance, about 25 meters downstream. We knew we would come back to the same direction, so we put just our garage in a bag with our beer cans and hoisted it up over a tree. This is a common thing to do while camping, as it keeps wildlife and bears away from getting into your garbage. We knew we would be back in the same direction in a few hours to collect our garbage to bring back to our main campsite. For the remainder of the hike, I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching us, but there weren't any other signs of people around us. When we reached the end point, nearly exhausted, but also satisfied with how far we had come, we debated stopping again for the rest before making the 6-hour walk back to our campsite. As we discussed, I mentioned that I kind of just want to get back to our campsite because I can't shake the feeling that I was being watched. 2 of my 3 friends also admitted that they had a similar feeling, so we decided to head back. As we approached the same area where we rested and swam earlier, we came across our garbage bag. It had been removed from the tree and emptied. The weird thing was that it wasn't ripped or torn as you might expect from an animal. Instead, it was untied and neatly emptied and left wide open on the ground. We remembered the old cabin downstream, but there was no sign of it this time. As we walked a little further, we saw something up on a rock. It was our beer cans. We consumed 2 each, so there were 8 empty beer cans. Only they weren't just scattered on the rock as you might expect from an animal. They were neatly piled in a pyramid-type shape. As we got closer, we realized that the cans, well, let's just say we noticed a Polaroid photo tucked under the bottom one. It was a photo of the 4 of us swimming. Ooh. Completely freaked out at this point, we just kind of half ran and half walked back to our campsite. We arrived at dusk and decided that this night would be the last night of our originally planned 10-day camping trip. None of us slept a wink that night either. We stayed up by the fire, terrified and hoping for morning to come. By sunrise, we were packed up. We hiked out with our canoes. We were so happy to see our vehicles where we left it, and drove home together in silence. Did I experience sleep paralysis, or is it something else? Last night, I woke up around 4 a.m. because I had a serious urge to pee. Before I got to take any action, my eye caught some kind of human-shaped creature sitting on a chair next to my bed. I remember it's a rather slim, longish figure. Limbs were somewhat prominent, and it either had no head or it didn't have a face. Can't remember properly. But there was really nothing truly notable about its presence. Actually, it kind of reminded me from one of my friends. Like it seemed kind of normal, despite having no head or face, and appearing from nowhere to my bedroom in the middle of the night. When I saw it, I was a bit confused, but I wasn't afraid. I was totally able to move my body through the whole experience, since I remember changing my posture to sitting on the edge of my bed when I actually realized that I wasn't alone in my home. Mind you, I live alone, and I felt like the situation needed some attention. Like I said, I wasn't afraid at any point. I kind of remember thinking like I maybe should be, but I decided that fear wouldn't bring anything more to the situation itself, so I just sat there and stared at this mysterious shadow person. It didn't pay any attention to me, actually, just sat there minding their own business, I guess. first I was thinking that I maybe should ask them to leave, since they didn't have permission to hang out in my bedroom. But I decided not to make any contact with it. I don't know why, since I'm still dying out of curiosity, but I think everything went just like it was supposed to. So after like 2 of the longest minutes I've ever felt, I finally remembered my bladder and realized I truly needed to pee. I turned my back to the creature so I could turn on a light on my bedside table, and when I was done and got up from bed, the shadow dude was just gone. No big emotions, no fear. No typical sleep paralysis symptoms like anxiety, pressure, or being unable to move my body. The situation felt somewhat eerie, but I quite naturally accepted the presence of the whatever it was. I went to the bathroom, then back to bed, fell asleep again. This quote-unquote meeting was the first thing I remembered in the morning. And despite thinking this whole thing, I've just been awake and haven't succeeded to come up with any logical explanation. Also, I'd like to add that I'm not on any medication. I've never been diagnosed with any psychological conditions or engaged in psychotic behaviors. I was totally sober when I went to sleep, and I've had no prominent stress in my life, at least lately, that could possibly explain this experience. How to deal with the fear of the paranormal. As the title states, I'm struggling with my fear of the paranormal. I've never had this problem before. I've enjoyed horror games and podcasts and such. Anything from ghosts and spirits to eldritch beings that have the ability to warp reality. I've always really enjoyed these things and found the monster ideas and takes on them interesting. But nothing ever stuck with me, and I would pass them all off as nonsense and just people seeing things either because they have never spent a lot of time in places like the woods or don't know what things are, or they're on drugs. That was until a couple of days ago. I recently have gone down the rabbit hole of skinwalkers and similar monsters like the rake. I don't know what it was about this particular folklore monster, but it had me shook. The creepy depictions of them when they aren't transformed into anything, and the fact that they have the ability to take the form of people you know or your pets, and stories I've read and videos I've seen have really kind of messed with me. I live in a very rural area and work outside till sunset almost every day. And now I'm looking over my shoulder non-stop and paranoid that one of these things is really going to get me. I even look at my dogs and horses with suspicion now. Again, I've never been superstitious and just found these things interesting until now. Do you have any tips on how to deal with these irrational fears? Ask Reddit. I was 19, driving around town with a friend sometime after midnight, talking shit and listening to music. We drive past this road with a signpost to an area neither of us have heard of, despite both of us living in town our whole lives. I asked if she wanted to see where the road went. She said yes, so I pull a U-turn and off we go. It's a paved road, heavy trees on each side, and a few houses. Nothing unusual for either of us. I was living on a street like that at the time. Anyway, within about 5 minutes, the conversation just kind of dies off. A few minutes after that, I start to get an uneasy feeling. Then we passed a kangaroo on the side of the road. It remained perfectly still, just turning its head to watch us drive past, and I got the distinct impression that it was standing guard. After that, I just got more and more anxious. I ended up turning to my friend and saying, "This is gonna sound stupid, but can you..." She was already taking her seatbelt off. "I'll lock the back doors." We kept following the road even after that because we were stubborn bitches. We don't know when to admit defeat. It was at least half an hour because my 60-minute cassette tape had flipped over twice, 30 minutes of music on each side. Between pulling onto the paved road and coming to a sign saying, "Dirt road ahead." By this stage, I felt physically sick and my skin was crawling. Without a word, I did the quickest 3-point turn I was able to do and we headed back down the road. The closer we got to the turnoff, the better I felt, until we were back on the main road where I felt like I could breathe easily. We told a few people about it, got brushed off mostly. We didn't even pass that turn off without flinching or shuddering for a few months. The feeling of dread had been that strong. Then about 6 months later, she turns to me out of nowhere and said, "Let's drive it during the day." So, we went. My friend has both her phone and mine on her lap with emergency numbers punched in. We're playing upbeat pop music to try and keep us calm. It took us less than 5 minutes to reach the dirt road, and on checking the odometer, the paved section was only 1 kilometer long. Once again, we got the fuck out of there. Never been back. No idea what the hell was going on that night, but I can say with certainty that we were not meant to be there. Even 20 years later, if somebody mentions the area on the signpost, we shudder. And recently, I turned to her out of nowhere and said, "Hey, was that you with me on the road to nowhere?" "Yeah, I don't want to talk about it." Conflicting feelings about if what I saw was a ghost or my tired imagination. Years ago, I lived in a high-rise in Okinawa, on property where a bloody battle was fought during World War II. I was up late sewing one evening. I was in the dining room and had the TV on in the background. I got up to switch stations on the TV when I looked down the hallway to where the bedrooms were. At the end of the hallway, I saw the figure of a man. The man of grayish tones, and he was only visible from his head down to his mid-thigh. They were faded out. He didn't seem to move, but he was looking toward me. I stood there frozen for a few seconds, never taking my eyes off of him, before I quickly looked to the front door to see if it had been opened. The deadbolt on the front door was still locked, so I knew the front door hadn't been opened. When I looked back down the hallway, he was gone. I quickly flipped on the hallway light and ran to check on my children. They were safety, pretty much alone in their rooms, just in there. During those few brief moments this occurred, I felt cold, and my stomach was in knots. My heart was racing as I ran through the rest of the apartment to make sure no one had entered. I finally returned to the dining room where I sat and began to analyze what I had just seen. While I knew without a doubt that I had just seen someone, I also kept telling myself that my eyes had played a trick on me because I was tired from being up so late. Prior to this event, I never had been one to really think about ghosts or spirits, and I certainly didn't believe in them. In the years since, I've thought of this experience many, many times, and I've never doubted what I saw. Even having experienced this, I still feel conflicted about whether I believe in ghosts or not. Three of the ghosts I've met didn't know they were dead until I told them. I had felt an unsettling feeling in my bowels a few times, including apparitions and whispered voices in my life. Decades ago, if you were to tell a spirit that they were dead and they could move on now out loud 3 times, they will depart. Since then, I've encountered 3 spirits at my respective workplaces. I decided to test this theory, if you will, and I've never felt them again. The most recent, just a month or so ago, I allowed, quote-unquote, the spirit to inform me of their demise. They sent a very sharp pain to my scalp, and I somehow knew it was the head of an axe. I'm still skeptical enough that I'll let this go on for a few days, and I told them twice that they're dead, and that they can move on now, but the sharp pain in my head intensified when I was near their area. I was telling my coworker about this, and I've talked about these things with him before. He doesn't think I'm crazy, or he at least indulges my musings. I was telling him out in the parking lot after our shift, joking that I already told the spirit that they're dead, but only twice, and he was like, "Oh man, you can't leave them hanging like that." So I looked over to the area where the spirit lingered and almost casually said, "Okay, fine, you're dead, you can move on now." And I felt the most intense chill run from my core up through my scalp and suddenly release my energy. I don't sense the presence of that ghost anymore. He was a sweet old man that didn't want the power lines coming through his property back around the turn of the last century. And somebody, maybe even himself by accident, split his skull wide open with the axe that he had in his hands. Seems to me that he tried to chop down the power line and electrocuted himself, and the axe came back upon his skull by the surge. I don't watch many ghost shows on TV, but it seems most solutions include commanding them to leave or telling them that they're not welcome anymore. I don't remember hearing of anybody simply telling these trapped souls that they're actually dead. Makes me think that the poltergeist-type activities are souls that are really mad that they can't interact physically with us. I have another theory about these souls being trapped by early electricity technology before wires were insulated, but that's a discussion for another time. Anyone know what this could have been? I'm not the best at explaining things, but I'll try. I guess I'm wanting to know possibly what happened or what it or they or was or were. What happened at least 3 times from my memory? I don't know how old I was exactly, but I know it was before I turned 10, and I was pretty young. My guess is 5 or 8 years old. Not sure if age matters, and if this was in my childhood home in Australia, but not really sure if it's relevant. So I was laying in my bed at night, and one incident was I saw my sister turn off my bedroom light. All other lights in the house were off besides the TV in the lounge room with its door closed. As I was laying in my bed and watched her walk down the hallway, as much as I could in the dark, but when I looked back where she stood, there was a ghostly figure of my sister left there. Almost like she was still there, but still in the position turning the light off while looking into the room. This, of course, scared me, and I closed my eyes tight, hid under the blanket, scared, and fell asleep that way. The only other person that was up was my mom in the lounge room on the other side of the house. My younger sister was asleep. The second and third instant, pretty much this happened the same way twice. House lights all off as it was nighttime again. Younger sister was in bed and my mom and older sister were in the lounge room again. I look at my open door and see my mom's head peeping around the door staring at me with, I don't know, they seemed like pretty scary eyes, like maybe they were an empty, dead look or something. I looked away and back and it was still there. Closed my eyes, called my mom. She came in from the lounge room, so it wasn't her, nor did she know what I was trying to tell her that I saw. This figure was full normal coloring. As mentioned, this happened twice, pretty much the same way. I felt scared watching and just plain uncomfortable both leading up to and after both times. I was just laying in bed trying to fall asleep. Any suggestion on what these experiences could have been? If I remember any other relevant info, I'll add it. I'm just curious on what the fuck happened and if it's always bothered me. Step into the cryptic world of Paranormal M. We're your guides to the unexplained, bringing you tales that'll make your spine tingle. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and turn on notifications to explore our latest narratives. We hope you're ready to be mystified. One of the more recent encounters at an estate sale. Since we're approaching Halloween, I'd like to share the most recent event that happened a short time before COVID. My wife and I like to go to garage and estate sales in the Modesto, California area. We follow the signs to an estate sale in a poor area. As we get out of the car, I can tell this is going to be a waste of time, as the person who passed really didn't have anything of significant value and didn't throw much away either. I usually head towards the bedrooms looking for office supplies. As I make my way down the hall, I notice one of the rooms has a lot of Christmas decorations, and I mean a lot. I also notice that each table is segregated with different types of decorations. 4 to 5 different tables. I looked at one table and it was full of decorations that would be hung on the walls. Another one had tree decorations. I visually scan each table in the room and I realize that I'm the only person in there. This is very unusual for any estate sale. But as soon as I realize this, I look back at the table to my right. This table is full of decorations that you would place on the mantle or on the dinner table. Items that would be placed on top of any flat surface throughout the house. Right smack in the middle of the table, this frosted, chrome-looking Santa Claus. It starts shaking by itself. Not just vibrating. I'm talking it's shaking pretty good. I stare at it long enough to ask myself, am I really seeing this shit? I'm looking hard enough to know that that specific item is absolutely not supposed to be doing that. As close as everything else is around it, nothing else is moving. I make a beeline for the front door and holler to the wife that we gotta go, and we leave. When my grandma passed. Years ago, my grandma passed on Thanksgiving morning. This holiday was special because she wanted everyone together at her house for it. She was extremely persistent about everybody being there. She even paid for a lot of family members to go. We hadn't had a Thanksgiving there in probably 10 years. She lived in Hawaii, so it was easier for her to fly out to us. But this Thanksgiving, she wanted us back home on the island. Everything was going great. I was so incredibly happy. I loved my grandma so much. She was my favorite person in the whole world. We all hung out the night before, took pictures, had good laughs, talked about what everyone was cooking for the big day. We said goodnight and I love you. The next morning felt like Christmas. I was so excited. I remember taking a shower, and when I came out, I got this sick feeling, like my stomach dropped. I looked in the mirror and my face was extremely pale, and I noticed my legs. They looked so wrong, like pale and purple and blotchy. I freaked out. It really scared me. I ran to my room and looked in that mirror, but everything was fine. I looked totally fine. I felt sick, though. When I got downstairs, my mom said that we had to go to Grandma's because she's not answering anyone. This wasn't uncommon, I guess. Sometimes she would lock her door and sleep with the TV on, so if she overslept, she wouldn't hear you. We got to her house and I just knew something was wrong. Everyone acted like this was normal, but it felt to me like, I don't know. My mom knocked on her door and told her that it was time to wake up. I begged her and my grandpa to open the door and just break it down. They said no, she was fine, just oversleeping. So I started hitting the door. I told them to break in and that something was wrong. My grandpa finally got the door unlocked, and my grandma was on the floor. She had fallen off the bed and onto the other side. When I looked down, all I saw was her legs. They looked just like mine did that morning. My mom screamed, and I just froze. I couldn't breathe right, and I ended up in the bathroom. When I looked up, I was extremely pale, and I felt so sick. We learned that she had a severe heart attack in her sleep. I always felt my grandma knew her time was coming. She was only 60. Super crazy experience with an entity. So Friday night, me and my friend met up on his land. We were going to take some psychedelics and chill out. He's always told me that the place is haunted by something. He wakes up to stuff flying off of his dresser. He sees shadow figures in the woods at night. But we were ready for whatever was going to happen. Oh man, did shit go down. As we started to peek, we heard a shit ton of rustling in the woods around us. I was faced so that my back was turned to most of where it was happening, so I wasn't watching what was happening, but he was. He was sort of trying to keep the fact that it wasn't an animal away from me because he knew it would freak me out, but I kind of knew it was paranormal. But I didn't ask any questions really because I knew it would freak me out too. But eventually we couldn't ignore it. It started to make a shit ton of noise all around us. But I noticed it was staying at a distance. I saw this glimmering hexagon shield that was my, basically, vision woven into my visuals. And I asked my friend if there was some sort of shield around us. He said there was, but he didn't know why. It then started to try pushing through, and after 2 failed attempts, the campfire we were sitting around, which was out, spontaneously combusted. I asked my friend if he did that, and he said, no, it was showing us that it still could. It left right after this. He said it looked like an outline of a figure, and inside the outline was energy. But it was disturbing and had a shit ton of bad feelings connected to it. Super crazy experience. I saw a demon when I was about 10. My grandparents owned about 20 acres of land in central Missouri, and throughout my childhood, my parents would send me to stay with them. The house they lived in was very old. There was a local legend that the guy who originally built it ritualistically killed his daughter and wife. In exchange, the devil supposedly gave him 2 magic rings. One allowed him to transform into a massive wolf, and the other allowed him to become a bear. My grandpa always loved to tell me that story to freak me out. One night when I was about 10, my grandparents left me alone in the house to go play poker at a friend's. Around 10 p.m., I began hearing howling circling the house. I was panicking. Then I heard scratching on the front door. Slow, methodical scratching, like it was trying to get in, but like it was doing it to intimidate me. The howling started to sound, well, human around, like someone was yelling. I ran upstairs and hid in my bed. Eventually, the noises all stopped and I went to the window to look outside. In the moonlight, I could see a massive wolf standing in the front yard. It locked eyes with me. And then it stood up on its back legs. I screamed and I was crying. I hid underneath my bed until my grandparents got back hours later. And believe it or not, they actually believed me. Because they were basically, it was pretty obvious there was large scratch marks on the front door. The marks started above the door, so high up that whoever carved them would have had to have been at least 8 feet tall. I need advice on what to do. So I, a 20-year-old female, have always been able to sense things that are not of this world. Growing up, paranormal stuff happened in my home and I got used to it. Well, I started working for a cleaning company. I have one building that I clean every day through the week. At first it was fine, nothing really happened. And one day when I was cleaning, I heard a stack of papers get hit off a desk. It scared me and I clocked out and left as soon as I got done, and I didn't go check it out. We recently have picked up a good bit. Don't know what to do. I've never addressed it or acknowledged it. I get a bad feeling about 2 rooms. I just get a bad vibe from the rooms, like someone's in there and doesn't feel friendly. So just for a little context, all of the printers and scanners are motion censored. So recently they'll start beeping as if someone is moving in front of them. They will beep all over the building as I'm cleaning. Mind you, I have to clean when everybody's gone, so it's just me there. The other day I felt 2 taps on my back when I was cleaning the toilet. They weren't hard, but very light. So I don't know if whatever's in there is trying to get my attention or what. Makes me feel very uncomfortable when I got, but I ignored it and I stayed calm. I don't know if I should talk to it and acknowledge it, or continue to ignore it as best as possible. Any advice would be great. I just remembered about a weird experience I had a number of years ago. So to give some context, this happened at school when I was probably around 10 or 11 years old. I'm from South Africa, and everyone always said that the school, or at least a part of the school's property, used to be a hospital during the Anglo-Boer War. Boer? B-O-E-R-E. During the Anglo-Boer War. I was in what we call daycare. It's basically just a place where kids would go after school if their parents weren't able to pick them up right after. I don't know if there's other names for that in other places, but the daycare was at an old gym. It was basically a square building at the back of the school. It had an entrance at one of the far ends that opened up into a big room about half the size of the entire building. On the opposite side of the building from this entrance, there was another door that led to a completely separate part of the building that was used to store sporting equipment. Now, this door was rarely open, and I don't think I've ever seen it open before this experience. Now, this is where the story starts. One day, a few of us kids got curious and decided we wanted to try to see what was on the other side of this door. So we started making turns looking through the keyhole and underneath the door. Now, this is what I remember seeing. The first time I looked through the keyhole, I just saw darkness, as if something was covering the keyhole on the other side. The second time I looked, I saw a yellow wall in front of me with some sort of black board thing standing to the right and a bunch of boxes and equipment scattered around the room. The third time, there was a staircase in the middle of where the yellow wall was, and the blackboard that was off to the right was covering it. The last time I looked, the staircase was open, and we could see all the way to the top where the staircase split left and right into other rooms. I also know that it wasn't just me who saw it, because we were like 5 or 6 kids standing there, and everybody said that they saw the same thing. At some point, one of the kids said that they saw a pair of golden boots under the door. When they looked again, it was gone. Another kid said that they saw someone at the top of the staircase through the window that was above the door. After some time, the caretaker must have heard us going crazy or something, so she came to open the door to show us. And it was just the staircase like I described it when I looked the last time. I saw my dad, who passes away, in my dream. So my dad died in 2017. I live with my mother, and I talked to my dad once a month or so. He was an alcoholic and had financial problems, and he mostly called me when he needed money. Needless to say, we weren't that close. It was the day after Christmas, December 26th, when I got a call from my estranged uncle informing me that my dad had passed away some time ago and he just found him when visiting him for the holidays. They saw each other only around holidays in general and didn't talk much, hence the delay in noticing that he had died. I didn't attend the funeral. I was feeling very guilty as the last time we spoke in October, my dad asked me for money, and he said that he needed me. In response to that, I asked him, "And where were you when I needed you?" I hung up the phone. Little did I know, that would be the last time I would hear his voice, and the last words he would hear from me. After I got a call regarding his passing, I was like a shadow of myself. Even though we weren't as close as I wanted us to be, I still grieved. It was my dad after all. Some time passed after the funeral, several weeks or a month, something like that. And I went to bed one night. I fell asleep as usual with my laptop on my nightstand next to my bed, and an episode of some kind of sitcom to help me doze off more easily. I dreamt about my dad. I dreamt we were at a thrift store looking at clothes. He was wearing his usual jacket, sweater, and jeans as I remembered him, and I asked him if he needed anything. He said, "Nope, I have everything I could have asked for." As he looked at me and he smiled. I woke up and immediately wanted to cry, but at the same time I was happy and felt a great weight has been lifted basically off from me. It felt like it was really my dad visiting me in my dream, and I felt as if he was taken care of and he was happy and at peace. And he just wanted to let me know that everything was all right. I've dreamt about him several times before and after his passing, and it didn't feel the same. In this particular dream, I felt his presence. He wanted me to know that all is well, and it helped me to not feel as guilty as I did prior. Before that, I had a feeling that he died, thinking that I didn't love him, and that he felt incredibly alone. After that dream, I felt as I got another chance to see him and spend some time with him, and it did give me some peace. Cremated in my sleep. There is that stage in sleep immediately when you first fall asleep. I'm pretty sure it's the point where the sleep paralysis kicks in. It's like I just blink out ready for sleep, but my brain is aware of my surroundings. unable to control any movement of the rest of my body. So being awake inside my head, I experienced I guess you could call it an out-of-this-world thing. Initially, it began as a loud crackling like fire popping and engulfing timber and the roaring of flames surrounding the sound. From the top of my head and flooding down like a lava over all parts of my body, from the skin and the burning of my entire body. It felt as if I was being passed through an intense blaze, all in real time, but unable to be certain that the entire thing was just a strange occurrence and not actually happening. The heat of the fire is like every sensation except for the fact that I'm not actually burning, but all other senses are so real. The sound of the fire was as if being passed into it gradually and finally reaching a point where I wake up once the inferno reaches its peak. It wasn't until I had woken up, sat up, rolled a cigarette, making sense of what had just happened, that I was amused. I could simply assume it's like I was somehow being projected by some entity the process of passing a deceased person into a cremation. This was the second time being put through this experience. The first time I felt as this was actually happening, like someone setting me just while I was asleep. Just setting me alight. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't say I was in any way having a morbid fantasy. Such a flooding of thoughts and not knowing how real the feeling was amazing. Scared at first, but I seemed to reach a point where the entire thing, the possibility it's actually happening, I accept and I feel sort of a comfort during this and I let go. The last time was the other night. The familiarity of it kicked in immediately, and it's like I enjoyed it a little more. I'm a 40-year-old male. I'm a single parent and a social drug user. I've actually experienced an overdose years ago, but astonishingly was pulled from death and live today. I've never had a normal sleep pattern since being a child, and I would describe my life as kind of a well-experienced, good upbringing. Happy and positive outlook on life. I feel blessed that I do often have these type of experiences. Sorry for the crazy writing style, but I'm not finding it easy to dictate it as easily as I'd like to. Anybody have any questions or similar experiences? I would appreciate honesty from any replies, as complete honesty from me now is shown also. Native American. I was 11 years old, and my dad was an asshole military vet. I was washing dishes, and I saw a man in a Native American headdress walk right in front of me. I wasn't scared. Didn't think he was a ghost either because he looked real as fuck, but then he walked right through the wall. I just about shit myself. I immediately ran upstairs to tell my dad what I saw, and he said I was dumb for making things up. He grabbed me by the hair and shook my head side to side, saying, "See, the house is fucking dirty. If you turn your head fast, it'll look like you're seeing something that isn't there." Like I said, rude, grumpy, abusive military vet. Fast forward to, 3 or 4 months later. I'm experiencing things regularly. I smell tobacco burning in my room. I see the ghost Native American in my backyard. I see him in the hallway by my room. The only thing I can gather from his expression is that he looks lost or displeased about something, but I don't know what. I felt so alone because I couldn't tell my dad after he reacted the way that he did. One day I was chilling on the couch and my dad jumped up from the dining room table and ran to the back door, opened it and yelled, "Where the fuck are you? If you come back here again, I'm gonna kill you." I wasn't shocked by that reaction because I would expect basically nothing less from my dad, but what shocked me was what my skeptical dad said. My dad said there was a man outside in our backyard wearing an Indian headdress looking into our house. As he was telling me, he started to remember what I told him, and I immediately reminded him about the dishwashing incident that he dismissed. Eventually, my dad would see him multiple times inside our house, and he said that he seemed harmless. My dad told me not to interact with the ghost out of fear that it might give him power or make him stay. My dad eventually apologized to me for not believing me. If anyone was wondering what battlegrounds this ghost is, it's from Texas. Goblins exist. When I was in my early 20s, my friend and I in my boyfriend's basement were talking about paranormal things and discussing our views and experiences in that regard. There was a bedroom directly across from where we were sitting, and neither of us liked the vibes coming from that empty room, which is what started this conversation. After a few minutes, I felt something bump the back of the couch hard enough to make me bounce forward a little. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I didn't take it too seriously. Maybe I was just imagining it. But she said she felt it too. Whatever, I didn't believe her. Yet. That's when I saw something so horrific from the doorway of that room. I was absolutely certain I imagined it. I wasn't going to say anything about it. But when she described the thing, holy shitballs. At the bottom of the doorway, a little being that I can only say looked a little like the head of a goblin from the movie Legend with Tom Cruise, except without the huge nose, and also add a scary face, wide grin full of sharp teeth and greasy-looking black ringlets of hair. He sprang up diagonally from the near bottom of that dark doorway. It looked right at me, then disappeared the same way that it had appeared. I couldn't help the gasp that escaped me, but I said, I was going to keep it to myself, so neither of us questioned my sanity until she spoke up and said, I saw it too. Now, I hadn't told her that I saw anything, but she went on to describe everything I had just said above while I sat there speechless and scared. It didn't take long after that to gather up our belongings and zip past that dark doorway and sprint up those stairs so fast. Never went down there again. They came from the closet. I very clearly remember when I was still small enough to be put into a crib. My mom got a phone call and had put me in the crib. It was dusk outside and she left the light off. I was not happy, and I recall I was standing up, screaming. I didn't want to go to sleep. Suddenly, a bunch of beings, possibly ghosts because they were see-through, but I could see the outlines of their faces and features. They gathered around my crib and were bobbing their heads in and out of my space, pointing and laughing at me. That was the first time I scaled the crib walls, according to the surprise I gave my mom when I went straight to her screaming in terror. I don't recall anything after that moment. Skip ahead a few years and I'm in a new house, a new bedroom. I'm laying in bed, trying to pretend to be sick. My mom fixed that with making me stay in bed all day long. I wasn't tired, but when I was little I could hypnotize myself by focusing on a smooth liquid sphere in my head that would change colors and flatten, then morph into a marble-sized shiny sphere. This would help me fall asleep usually. So here I was, eyes closed, lying on my bed trying to sleep, and for some reason I opened my eyes to see these freaking ghosts coming out of the new closet. They surrounded my bed, said they came to say goodbye, Then one of them said, "Hey, let's jump on her bed before we go," to something to that effect. I shit you not, they jumped, my bed bounced, and I bounced. Then they went back into the closet, and I never slept with the closet door open ever again. I slept at the Valisca axe murder house, and I got pictures. I've got several pictures, but I'll do a few a day. The first one, orbs all around the place. I've got others that show them much clearer, but that's later. I circled the orbs the camera picked up. Now that portrait, look very closely. I circled the faces in it. There's one in particular that's scary as fuck. My ghost hunter friend brought these up to really good microphones, and it picked up a lot of whispers. There's no electricity or water hooked up to the house. It was a bit creepy seeing where the killer must have sat, where the two little girls hid downstairs. The creepiest and most terrifying was the placement of the kid's room where the infant and two young kids slept. This was on the other side of the parents' room. I had to go through the parents' room to the kids' room. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been for those kids? The case has finally been solved, though. I'll let you in on it when I post the last picture, unless demands for the reveal sooner numbers in the double digits. My childhood home. Now, I'd like to start off by saying I loved the home I grew up in, but there was something seriously wrong with the property. I was, and still am convinced it was very haunted. Something was definitely there. I had a few encounters where I'd see shadows and reflections of our windows. I'd hear what I believed to be a mimic pretending to be my mom and dad. I would hear my parents call me in the middle of the night, but they were fast asleep every time. Me and my best friend heard a car pull up multiple times and someone knocking at the front door, but when we looked, there was no sign anybody had been there at all. I have many stories about this house, but there's one in particular that always sends chills up my spine. There was one room in my house, the guest room. It was across from my bed, and originally it was my bedroom, but it scared me so much that I switched rooms. One day, me and my best friend, both lovers of spooky stuff, decided that we would try and sleep in the guest room with my dog, Jojo. I've always had trouble falling asleep, so I was lying in bed, and then I thought Caitlin was asleep next to me. In the silence of the pitch-black room, I began to hear whispers in the corner of the room. I couldn't tell what it was saying, but I heard the whispering clear as day. I froze and was terrified, but didn't say anything because I didn't want to scare Caitlin. In the morning, I confronted her about it, and she had heard it too, but she didn't want to scare me. But that's not all that happened. She then told me after she heard the whisper, she felt as if nails were touching her ankle. At first, she thought it was my dog, but my dog was sleeping up by my head. Then she felt long, bony fingers slide up her ankle and grab her ankle. She again didn't say anything out of fear. Like I said before, we had many experiences similar to this in the house, but nothing as clear and terrifying as this. There was another time when we were joking around in my chicken coop and telling scary stories. Caitlin took multiple pictures and videos of me making silly faces. We went back inside not knowing what we had captured. The next day we looked over the pictures, and in basically only one of the pictures, we saw behind me in the window a pale, skeletal face looking in the window at us. Before my family owned this house and the older woman had died in the home, any history before that, I have no clue. The man with the top hat. When I was just a small lad, maybe around 10, my family and I moved to a small town in the northeast area of Cork. And this thing has been basically following me ever since. His shape is never very defined, and most of the time he just resembles the dark silhouette of a fairly tall man wearing a stovepipe hat. Sometimes I can make out a crisp white collar and a dark black ascot, or an eye shine like a cat's in the night, but I've never been able to make out his face. It started the day that there was a car crash on my way to primary. My school wasn't far, about a half-hour walk. My mom felt I was old enough to make the walk by myself. I was crossing the street when a lorry blitzed by and T-boned some poor sedan. I didn't see much of the wreck, if I'm honest, but I remember the crunch and the